Hello, and welcome to the Mr. 50mm YouTube channel. I'm Chris, and today we're having a look at a classic Canon, specifically this, the original Canon F-1. Not the new fangled one, not the semi-new one, the first version. After reviewing my Nikon F2A, I felt compelled to have a look at a Canon flagship. Also, it gave me an excuse to shoot some FD glass, which is pretty great. So, yeah, we're having a look at this. And no, this one was not gifted to me. I bought this with my own buckaroos long ago. Before we get into the video though, it's time to plug my brother's channel. Yes, I have a brother still, and he has a YouTube channel. He also does photography content and more. And his channel is Chang of Fools. There's a link in the description below and a card up here. So click there, open a tab, and check it out after watching this video. Or if you want, watch one of his now and then come back here. Both are good. Alright? And with that, let's get a look. And with that, let's go back to that whole comment I made about being the OG F1 variant, not the new one or the F1N. For a quick explainer on the differences, have a look at this video from the camera store. It's not sponsored or anything. I just like the video and they did a nice short explainer on what the differences are. But yes, there are some differences, and I again am looking at the original F1. Now, let's get into it. What is the F1? Well, it's this camera here. It is Canon's first professional 35mm SLR. It features the then new Canon FD lens system, and it was announced in September of 1970, with commercial release beginning in March of 1971. And it had a production run that lasted till 1981. That's 10 years. The F1's shutter is fully mechanical, and I believe this is the first instance of Canon boasting shutter endurance ratings and other fun shutter facts. For example, the F1's shutter life is rated for 100,000 shots, and it has an operating temperature range from -30 to +60 degrees C. That's more than my operating range. And it can also operate in up to 90% humidity, which is pretty cool. And the shutter is good from 1 second to 1/2000th of a second. It also has a bulb mode, and flash sync is at up to 1/60th of a second. The F1 features a as stock 0.77 times magnification viewfinder. That's the one that I've got in my hand. And that features a 97% coverage. All right, let's see, can it focus? There we go, thank you. Now, the focusing screen on the F1 is as stock, a split prism with a micro prism color. The camera features a CDS meter, and it offers a match needle style system for your exposure. The supported film speeds of the F1 are 25 to 1600 on this original variant. The camera also features a self-timer that's good for up to 10 seconds. The F1 weighs in at 845 grams without a lens. However, this can wildly change since the F1, like other pro cameras of the era, are highly modular. You might have noticed I was holding the stock finder in my hand. But yes, you can do things like swap out your finders, focusing screens, backs, you can add in motor drives, grips, all sorts of things. In its base configuration though, this camera does use a 625 mercury cell to power the meter. However, with the cell no longer being in production, there are modern alternatives. For example, you can use a hearing aid battery of a similar size, and I'll link to that in the description below, just in case you're wondering. Now, in 1971, the F1 was priced at 78,000 yen. That's a staggering 268,000 yen in 2026 dollars. That's around 1,750 USD, or 2,375 Canadian. Can you imagine that? A flagship camera for less than 2,000 USD. In that way, the past was pretty neat. When holding this camera, it is a bit evident that this is a classic SLR. I mean, look at it. You got a classic front that is flat and a rear that is also flat. No grippy accoutrements for your hands. But that's personally fine. I find that despite the lack of the grippages, the camera is fairly comfortable, especially with a smaller prime lens like this one. I'm using the 50mm f1.4, and I find that it is overall, on this camera, fairly well balanced. The camera's actual heft might have to do with that as well, since it does help keep the weight of the camera centered towards the camera itself. So I don't find this any less comfortable than a modern DSLR. Although I imagine with longer, larger lenses, that probably changes. I would probably want to add an optional grip to it. One thing that I think was kind of weird that I did find with this camera was that it is missing that little film info slot that you find on a lot of SLRs that are of this era. I really liked using those. And even when I end up with film that doesn't have a little piece of the packaging to tear off and put into that slot, I end up writing on some cardboard and putting it in there, just so that I remember what's in there. And I remember that there's film loaded in it, since I do sometimes forget. And I admit that part of that's probably because I have a lot of cameras, but yeah, there are times when the status of a camera escapes me and I do something stupid like open it up and expose the film. Maybe this is less important for someone that doesn't have the mental sickness that I do, but I really miss the little slot for me to slot the little film info thingies into. Anyways, moving on. Despite that, the fact that this camera is extremely modular, it feels very, very sturdy in hand. And for the most part, I find that changing parts on this camera is fairly straightforward. For example, on this finder, I can figure it out without instructions. Clearly, if you look at it, there are two buttons there and there. Press it, pull it, and awesome. There you go. And it's pretty easy to do. Basically doesn't require too much force, although it does require intention, which is what you'll want in an interlock. Look at that. Now it's back to being stock. Random fun fact, you might have noticed that this finder is 3D printed. Now, I figured out that the interlock on the F1 is pretty simple, and as a result, I was able to model a locking waist level finder. And I made two variants. I made this one here that you see. Let's see if it'll focus. Maybe not, maybe, well, I'm gonna just go closer. Go closer, that'll fix it, right? There we go. There's a magnifier in there. And the magnifier is made from the lens of a Kodak Brownie Starlet. It makes a great magnifier. Now, the other one I made is this one here. This does not have a magnifier. There's just a hole. So, yeah, you can see right through that. Additionally, I also have these finder covers. So, if any of you would like any of these for your F1, I'll post a link to the files to that online with instructions. And that'll be in the description below, and probably another card link above. Just to give you an idea of what you can customize your F1 to do, here are some shots from the manual. Look at all the things you can swap and add and stuff. There's a lot of options with this camera. Now, when it comes to shooting with the F1, things are pretty intuitive. Honestly, I think more so than my Nikon F2, at least in the base configs of both. The meter on this camera is controlled by just a switch, and that's over here. It's very easy, and honestly, I just leave it on most of the times. And when you do that, you don't have to worry about having the film advance being in the right spot or whatever. It's just on. It's just on, always metering. Things are good to go. Now, the meter, it is nicely integrated, and as I said before, this is the match needle system. So it's basically a game of getting your circle moved over your needle. And when it's there, your exposure is good. It's very easy to intuit, and I like the system very much. But here's the thing about that meter. It's made to work with 1.35 volt mercury cells. I don't have those. So I use regular alkaline cells, like a weird peasant. I may eventually switch to those hearing aid batteries I hear about, but for now, I'm using the 1.5 volts. And I do want to say, you do need to take some precautions when doing so, and I forgot to take those on my first roll of film. On my first roll, I just set the film to the normal film speed and off I went. And just in case you were wondering, 1.5 volts isn't 1.35. I checked the math. 1.5 is verifiably a bigger number than 1.3. Now, you can still do what I'm doing using a 1.5 volt cell, but you do gotta figure out the offset. And here's what you gotta do. Go grab a DSLR or a camera or a smartphone. Hopefully you have like the light meter app or whatever, open that up. If you're using a camera, set the meter to the center weight and just pick a general scene out by a window or something as your reference. Point your camera, your F1, out the window and see what the meter says. Then point your DSLR to the same spot on your center weighted thing and see what that meter says. From there, you should be able to tell how many stops you gotta adjust. Or, if you're lazy, just effectively change your ISO setting till the setting that your DSLR was on matches what's on the camera. And with that, you should be good to go. Now, generally though, for these alkaline batteries, you could probably also just assume that your camera is going to underexpose. And I think a reasonable amount would be about a stop. But you, again, actually testing it is probably the best way to go because it's not that hard. On my second roll, I did actually do this, and I took my camera and set the DSLR as a reference and then tweaked the settings till I got my F1 to broadly line up with it. And it ended up being that I loaded in a Kodak 400, the gold series, and it was expired. So I set my camera to 200 anyways. And then with the adjustments I'd made with the DSLR, I needed to bump that down to around ISO 125-ish. And honestly, I think that that adjustment worked pretty well. We'll see anyways. Well, you'll see it in the sample gallery. Anyways, if there's another reason that you know of that using an alkaline is a bad idea, please let me know in the comments below. Yeah, if I need some learning, then so be it. It'll just be more evidence that I should pick up one of those hearing aid batteries. Anyways, let's talk about the finder. If you saw my video on the Pentax ME Super, you know I really enjoyed how big that finder is. This one, on the F1, it's not that big. It's considerably not as big, but it is still perfectly good. It's very usable, and the fact that you get 97% frame coverage is very nice. And looking through the finder, with the stock prism, you get a reasonable amount of info. On your right, you got your meter and your matchstick or match needle system, and just underneath that, you got your shutter speed. All of this, by the way, is illuminated by this stripy thing here. Light is going through there and lighting up the info that you're seeing in the finder, just an FYI. Now, this finder though is lacking an aperture display, which feels a bit odd for a pro camera. I mean, the the F2A that I had, it did that. But this does not. But that's fine. And again, just as a reminder, the stock finder / the stock focusing screen on this is a split prism with a micro prism collar. And you'll also notice that in the view, you'll see a rectangular outline. This is actually actually meant to tell you that this is where the meter is metering. So it's pretty interesting, and I find it pretty useful, because then if you have a weird lighting scenario, if you just remind yourself that's where the camera is looking, you can usually figure out what's going on and adjust accordingly. For the upcoming sample gallery, what we have is the Flickfilm Aurora 400 and a roll of expired Kodak Gold 400. And honestly, I'm not really sure when the 400 expired, but I ended up shooting it as an ISO 200 film, and I did again mention that I forgot to accommodate for my battery voltage on the Aurora 400 film, so you'll probably notice a little more noise as I push my scans a bit. And on the Gold, I did account for the battery, and I accounted for the expiredness as well, generally, with about one stop. So yes, that is the overall story of the film. And when it comes to the actual scanning, for the most part, I used the Coolscan LS8000, scanned at 4000 DPI, using a single pass with 14-bit color. Then I edited the files in raw therapy, is what I would be saying if I didn't have to switch it part way through. Through part of the Kodak Gold scans, the LS8000 developed some technical problems. I believe the Firewire control IC may be dead, which is very sad, because I just made a video on it a little while ago that you might have seen where I gushed over the scanner. So I guess I will be parking the scanner for a bit while I look for repair options. I'll probably end up just buying that stupid IC and buying the soldering kit needed to put it on. But this is very annoying, because as I said in the other video, the LS8000 is worth the suck, and there's some suck upcoming. That's okay though. I have other film scanners, so at least for 35, I think we're good. I haven't decided what I'm going to scan the other photos with yet, but you'll see it in the sample gallery description. Recommendation and conclusion. As is tradition, we'll start with price. The price range for these can be a bit wonky, but I found that for normal versions of the F1 that don't have a special paint scheme, that are in normal condition given how old they are, they tend to seem to go for around 180 USD, again for an average condition working one. And this is on the online bidding sites, eBay if you will. Now if you want one from one of those camera retail stores, a used camera retail store, for a little more peace of mind, then they tend to charge closer to around 300 USD for a working but obviously used copy. And prices tend to go up from there based on condition. And you know the shops I'm talking about, right? Like the one that I mentioned earlier, Camera Store, spelled with a K, and KEH, also with the K. Now, this, for an older film SLR, is a bit pricey, especially if you have noticed that other Canon cameras like the AE1 can be seen for 75 USD to around 125 USD-ish. But if you want a Canon SLR that's fully mechanical, seemingly bulletproof, wonderfully modular, the F1, the old one, is a great choice, and at that price, it's still not bad. And here's another thing to take into account. If you're looking into stepping into the world of film and you're starting from a blank slate, overall, this might still be a good lower cost alternative to, say, a Nikon. Let me explain. Yes, this camera body does cost a bit more, but the system as a whole, the FD system, the glass, it's generally pretty cheap now. It's not as cheap as it once was, what with the use of adapters on mirrorless cameras becoming more and more mainstream, but it's still cheaper than, say, Nikon F-mount glass. And so yes, I understand that this does apply generally to Canon FD SLRs in general, but combined with the F1, its ability to switch out its bits as you see fit, and the cheapness of the FD glass, and overall the package isn't too bad price-wise, and it's very robust. Plus, if you ever get into using adapters on a mirrorless setup, FD adapters are also very cheap and very plentiful. And in spite of the FD mount being very dead for a pretty long time, effectively since EOS EF mount splashed onto the scene, Canon FD was a big deal. So FD glass is still around, and it's still fairly routine that I still see FD glass pop up at thrift shops. I think recently I've seen 51.8s, I've seen 28s. Generally, the stock of used FD is still pretty good, and even looking online, the numbers for FD lenses are quite healthy. And again, prices for these lenses tend to be fairly cheap. This 51.4, if you look hard enough, you can find it for around 50 bucks. If you want a super minty one, maybe like $100. Overall, the F1, it gets an easy recommendation. I'm going to be continuing to shoot mine on occasion. And I think overall this camera does look very pretty as well. Look at that text that Canon used. I really miss that. It is quite nice to look at. But let me know, do you have a favorite version of the F1? If so, which one is it? Do you also like the font on the prism? And did you want to try one of these 3D printed waist level finders? And if you do, feel free to head to Thingiverse and download that file. It's free. Otherwise, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. maybe a super thanks if you're into that, and to check out Chang of Fools. Till next time, bye.